Thank you for your patience and welcome back to the Rajasthan Silver Pearls front lawn. We are now ready to proceed with the next session, To the End of the Land. This is with David Grossman in conversation with Jonathan Shainin, and I will invite you to give a warm round of applause as the authors come up to the stage. This session is presented by the Rajasthan Patrika series. We'll do a very brief Q&A at the end of the session, and then David will be signing. So you can take your books over to the far left corner here at the Rajasthan Silver Pearls front lawns, and you can get your books signed there.
Is it working? Yes.
Works.
Good afternoon. Can you hear us out there? All right. Welcome to the front lawns. I may be a bit speechless in trying to introduce our guest, David Grossman. I don't want to spend too long on the introduction. David is the author of about 9 novels, is the author of 4 fantastic works of nonfiction. David is usually described, such as on the cover of this book, Falling Out of Time, as the greatest Israeli writer of his generation. I think I would say that's slightly unfair. I would say he's one of the greatest writers of his generation, period. And I'm sort of awestruck to be sitting here on stage with him. So a warm round of applause. Welcome to David Grossman.
Thank you very much.
So I thought we would start by talking about To the End of the Land, which is the book whose title has given us the name of this panel. David, this is a book that on the face of it has a very simple plot. It concerns a woman called Ora and her son Ofer. And when her son Ofer returns to the army after completing his service, he goes back in to participate in an operation. She decides that she cannot remain at home, that she will not be there waiting for the army notifiers to come and give her bad news. She says that I like this phrase, she's going to be a notification refusenik. And so she sets off on a journey. And I want you to fill in now what happens. Tell us what happens to Ora on her journey.
Shalom and good afternoon, and thank you for coming. Ora, she's a 50-year-old Israeli woman. She is married but separated from her husband Ilan, and she has 2 sons, Adam and Ofer. As you said, Ofer is about to end his military service. You know, we serve 3 years in the army since we are 18. We Israeli men, Israeli women serve a little less, 1 year less. And Ora, who feels that during his military service, her son has been taken away from her. He had to serve in the occupied territories. He has stiffened. As if he grew a thicker skin to defend himself from the harsh reality of the occupation. And surprisingly enough, Ofer, the son, agrees to come with his mama, which is not a very typical and taken for granted thing. He comes with her to a walk in the north of Israel, in the Galilee. She, of course, Ora, has her secret hopes that during this walk she will be able to melt the stiff exteriority of Ofer and in a way to regain the son that went to the army, and in a way she feels that she has lost him. But on the very day when he was about to end his military service and they were about to start their week of walking in nature in the Galilee, in the north of Israel, started yet another military operation in the occupied territories, and Ofer told her, I don't want to join you, I'm going to join my comrades. For 3 long years I was trained in order to fight and to fight together with my comrades, and I'm not going to abandon them at this time. So he almost forces her to bring him into the gathering point of the army from where he will be sent to the war, and she goes home and she's crushed because she has a very poignant knowledge, intuition, that the notifiers of the army will come and knock on her door and will announce her that Ofer died. And then after some hours of crazing herself, it occurred to her that it takes 2 for bad news, one to deliver and one to receive. And what if she is not there to receive? Maybe the whole machinery of the notification would be reversed for what? A minute? An hour, a day at the most, until they will find her. Israel is a very, very small place. And she decides to run away from home, to run away from the notification, not to collaborate with the machinery of the army, of the war, of the state. And she decides to run to the end of the land, to the most remote place of the land in the northern border. But on her way, she almost kidnaps a man. His name is Avram, like Abraham of the Bible, our patriarch, Abraham, our father, founder, life. She's not married to him. And Avram, who was like an explosion of ideas and passion and inventiveness and sexuality and imagination when he was 16 and 17 and 18, but when he was 21, exactly at the age of Ofer, the son right now, when Avram was 21 in the 73 war, the Yom Kippur war, he fell captive in the hands of the Egyptians, and he came back from captivity totally ruined in his mind, in his soul, in his body. He doesn't want to have anything with life. He cannot understand why life insists on him so much. And she decides to take him with her for a very specific reason that gradually, I'm not going to make a spoiler here, unfold in front of the reader. And they walk like 2 lunatics in the landscape of the Galilee. And as they walk, she starts to talk. And she starts to tell the life story of Ofer. This is the only thing she can do now. She cannot prevent the war. She cannot kidnap Ofer from his comrades. He doesn't want it, as I said. The only thing she can do in order to infuse some strength and kind of validity of existence to Ofer when he is out there against the harsh war is to, as if to recreate him by the stories of his life, the small minutiae details of life. She tells him how he was conceived and how she breastfed him. She remembers these long nights when she used to breastfeed him, and she suddenly remembers something that when she was a young mother, she did not put it in words. But now, after 21 years, she can. She remembers how she felt that she is being imprinted in the pupils of his eyes, and she knows that she will moment of eternity, as beautiful as she is now in this moment when she breastfed him. And she tells him how he for the first time stood on his feet, and I think everyone here saw a baby standing for the first time, and when they stand they are so, suddenly they are in another dimension because the voices come to them from different points of view and the sights, and all the feeling of the place that they occupy in the space is being altered. So she goes in all these hundreds of moments of devotion and of frustration and love, all the things from which we accumulate one human being in this world, while all the time she tells him this story, Avram feels also the other option life of this child. It is given to him and taken from him at the same time. And the whole book, it is not a book about war and peace. It's about, as I read it, it's about family and war. I think, I think that the story of the family is the greatest drama of mankind. And I always believe that the greatest moments of mankind, they happened not on battlefields, not on corridors of parliament, not in palaces, but rather in kitchens and in bedrooms and in rooms of children. And this, the softness and fragility of the family is the thing that Ora puts against the harsh radiation of the brutality of war. And they are having their journey, it's something like 500 kilometers of journey in the nature, and gradually they open up again to each other. Now I don't know if Ora was able to protect her son. I don't know, and I tell you right now, I leave the ending open because I leave it to the decision of every reader. But one thing is sure, she was able to save Avram. And one of the readers, I think she was from Brazil, she wrote me, maybe Ora is not a musa of art, but she's definitely a muse of life. And that's what she did.
We talked, so the Hebrew title of this book, tell me again what it is. So in English, the book is called To the End of the Land.
Yes.
And in Hebrew, it's A Mother Escapes?
No, a woman flees tidings, or a woman escaping the news. Now, my publisher, Knopf, said, well, it's a very not understandable title, which I find strange. It's so understandable. But then when they came up with the name To the End of the Land, I liked it because there is a double meaning here. It is both to the geographical end of the land, but also it refers to something that is so embedded in the book, but in our life in Israel. The terrible, the God forbid, I say in my atheist way, option of the end of the land, which is a feeling that I think every Israeli senses. The terrible option that Israel might not exist. Now I know that for many of you who have not visited Israel, Israel seems to be like, like a feast of military, of strength, of vigor. But I think every Israeli feels much more the fragility of the palm of the hand, and this tragic sense that maybe we have a great past and history and a very agitated and strong presence. But our future is very dubious. We live in an area that has never really accepted Israel, and probably later we shall go a little deeper into the situation there. But the basic, the primal feeling of every Israeli is this existential fear, is this shadow that all the time casts some gloom and uncertainty on our very being, which, by the way, might explain part of the excessive power that we use against every threat that we face. And the book is about this doubleness of having very rich and full and energetic life, as we do have in Israel. Israel is amazingly vital and vibrant country. And at the same time, there is this silent subcurrent of the other option.
Well, I wanted to ask you, I was going to say that, a lot of the reviews of this book, which almost all, celebrate it as a great masterpiece, often describe it as an anti-war book. And I was saying, I told you this yesterday, that it seemed to me that it's very much a book about the situation. This is the only Hebrew word that I remember, hamatzav.
Good.
The situation being the Israeli word for, the conflict, everything that's happening, and a book about the ways that this conflict forces everyone to participate, right? That Ora cannot avoid it. She's trying to run away from it, but she can't run away from it. But also at the same time, as you've said before, that sort of that life and love and spirit go on in spite of all of this.
Yeah, this is something that for decades I try to decode, to understand our existence in these very extreme conditions of life, on the edge of the abyss all the time, and yet being able to create a place that, in a way, if you look at it and if you just separate it for a second from the latest news that you heard on CNN or BBC or wherever, if you just go to the origins of the creation of the State of Israel 3 years after the Shoah, the Holocaust, 3 years after we have gone through a genocide that murdered 1/3 of our people, 3 years after that, Israel became to life, became a reality, a political reality, a state, and it remained a state against all odds. I can be very critical towards Israel and towards especially the government of Israel and the way we behave in the conflict between us and the Palestinians. But not for a minute I forget the fact that there was a kind of a secular miracle in the fact that we got this state from the United Nations, by United Nations resolution, by the agreement of 33 countries against 13. And we were able to create what we have created there in terms of culture, agriculture, the Hebrew language, who was a kind of a dormant beauty for 1800 years, and now it's a very vivid and used by everyone in Israel, creating industry and high-tech and a way of life which is not easy, a kind of a culture of our own life. And I keep remembering it because the alternative is, as I said, always present. And you mentioned Hamatzav. Hamatzav is our password. It's a kind of a euphemism that describes an ongoing bleeding of almost 100 years. Hamatzav means the situation. Now, it's a very tricky word, like most of the words that are used to describe our conflict or any conflict. The language is the first thing to be forged by the army, by the government, by our fears, by our enemy, by whatever you want. There is an immediate manipulation of words that can be too sharp or too painful, or that they will betray us by telling us the truth. So immediately a whole system of words and terminology is being created to spare us from the harshness of the situation. But Hamatzav is one of the best of these euphemisms, because Hamatzav indicates to something that is stable. Stable is yatziv. Try to use, for example, for a minute, your Hebrew application in your mind. Hamatzav yatziv. Do you hear the sounds are almost the same? And it means as if there is a stability, an ongoing stability. And as I said, it's not stability. It's bloodshed and occupation and terror and existential fear and all the goodies. All is embedded in this one word, Hamatzav, which also, Hamatzav means not something or a situation that someone has created or has caused because of what he did or what he did not, but it's fell from heaven, from the sky. It's kind of divine decree that orders us to kill and to be killed, and we just obediently collaborate with this distorted situation. So this is for Hamatzav. What I tried to catch to the end of the land is what happens to people who have to live their life within this matzav, within this situation. What do they allow themselves to know? How they buffer themselves from knowledge? What kind of mental mechanisms people are using in order not to know, and in a way not to be in their life, but to live in a kind of either a wishful reality or a nightmarish reality, but not really in the harshness of their life. What fear does to people, how fear shrinks you, how the instinct to minimize the part of your soul that comes in contact with the terrible reality. How do you protect your soul from not being part of this reality, but what is the price you pay for not being price? Questions like, we want to raise up and to bring up our children on values of openness, pluralism, curiosity to the other, to every other. But at the same time, maybe by so doing, we are not preparing them really to the lake of acid of our conflict. Maybe we should have brought them up as warriors, not as, open and exposed people. Because if we do raise them up on values of humanism, openness, maybe we are not preparing them for the life that they will have to live in this reality.
You told me yesterday that when the book came out, it was seen, because of the circumstances, as a tally of these costs. That people took the book as representing what was being lost, what could be lost in this conflict.
Yes, I can answer in two different ways, but the first thing is I should just mention the fact that 3 years and 3 months after I started writing the book, there was the war in Lebanon, between Israel and Lebanon, and my son fell in this war. My son Uri, who was almost 21 years old and who was very involved in the writing process of this book, he fell. And I am sure that it had to do with the acuteness of my writing the last versions of the book. But this is my private story, and this is what I'm able to say about it, because it is a private matter. But I can say that every Israeli knows this anxiety. Every Israeli has someone in his family or among his closest friends who fell in war. So in a way there is a very strong presence to death. There is a feeling of the proximity of death in Israel in a way that sometimes is unbearable. I think it dictates a lot of our behavior. There is this story that I think I told you when we first met about. There was a program in Israeli television where a foreign correspondent interviewed a couple, an Israeli couple, before they got married, in the evening of their marriage. And he asked them, how many children do you want to have? And immediately they said 3. And he was a little taken aback by the immediacy and the decisiveness of the answer. And he said, why exactly 3? And the bride said in a very sweet, tender voice, so if one of them is killed, we shall still have 2 left. Now I remember I saw the interviewer getting pale under his makeup, and I thought how terrible it is that this is the way of thinking, that instead of saying we want to have 3 or 4 because it's great to have children, because you are much more alive also through your children. No, she chose this answer, which I must say did not reveal anything new to me. It was in the air. It is something that maybe not every one of us had explicitly formulated it to himself or herself, but it sounded reasonable in the unreasonable and distorted reality of such a long conflict.
And you were in the middle of writing this book, and then you stopped, and then you returned to writing the book. And when you and I first met now, which is 8 years ago, you told me that you wouldn't want to use the word glad, but that it was a relief to you that this was the book that you were writing. Because when you returned to this book, this was a space where you could be with this memory and this pain.
Yeah.
But that for you, it was returning to writing, that writing was the act, writing was the place. where you could be?
Yes, I must say it is almost the same with every book I write, that I hope that after some months or years of writing it, it starts to be a place. We say in Hebrew, makom. It's a place, it's like a home that I can go back to, and I want to go back to, and I understand, and it's relevant, and I can decode. But of course, after such things that happened in my life and changed them totally, one of the very few things that remained steady and had an air of home was the story that I was writing, To the End of the Land. And I came back, and in the beginning I was able to write an hour for a day, and then an hour and a quarter, and an hour and a half. Each day I added a little more, because inevitably the need to keep your characters alive, and there is a kind of responsibility of a writer, and the need to infuse to them life and light and love and anecdotes and sense of humor and worldview, all the things that we do when we create a character. And then gradually I started to feel that I still have these things inside me. So writing the book was a kind of an act against the gravity of pain, and gradually coming back to life.
There's a sort of theme in a lot of your books, and you've just talked here about how, when Ora is traveling with Avram, she is kind of bringing Ofer to life by telling the story of his life. And this is a theme, I won't bore everyone with all the details, but it's a theme that runs through a number of your books. The sort of, it's almost as if they're sort of parables for the power of storytelling. Characters tell stories to other characters. The Ansel Wasserman in Sea Under Love, who is supposed to be killed, continues to tell these stories, and they can't kill him because he's continuing to tell stories. Talk to me about what it is about the telling of stories, or as you said, the retelling of our stories. What is so powerful about that for you?
First, it's a way of being in contact with people, and a way of dialogue. And I'm quite a fan of a dialogue, both in the private sphere, but also, of course, in the political sphere of life. And I feel that whenever we retell our story, we have a chance. Not all the time we are using this chance, sometimes on the contrary, but we have a chance to hear ourselves a little differently. Now, each and every one of us, we have our, let's say, official or formal version of us, of our history, of our trauma, of the way we have been treated by our parents, by our friends when we are children. And we have this formality, this visit card that we use. And over the years we even polish the story because we know what will be more effective and influential on the one who listens to us. But actually, if we allow ourselves, and this is something that writing allows, to go back to this, let's say, primal trauma, primal experience that have shaped us in our life, and to retell it, maybe suddenly we feel that we don't want to be entrapped in this official story. Maybe we realize to what extent this official story has damaged us, has fossilized us, yes, in these dead formulations that are no longer carry the flame of the authentic experience. For example, when I was writing the book of Intimate Grammar, the main character is 13 years old boy from Jerusalem. And I wrote it when I was, I think, 33. And then suddenly, beside my total identification of this little boy, I was able, when I retold the story that I knew from my childhood, I was able to see it also from the point of view of my parents and of the parents of the character in the book. So suddenly I realized that writing allows you a kind of movement. You are not stuck in one place, and if you are not stuck in one place, if you are not just a passive presence in your own life, if you are not only choosing the best version you want to be, but allow the real or some other versions of you to surface, well, suddenly you are not a victim even of some tragic, really tragic events in your life. You have the ability to move in front of them. You are not, again, you are not fossilized. You are not just a target for this arbitrariness that radiates to you from outside. But you are able to move, and if you move, you are not a victim. And believe me, as an Israeli and as a Jew, not to be a victim, it's a great thing.
I want to talk about...
Thank you.
I want to talk about Falling Out of Time now, without keeping us in this zone for too much longer, because this is a very unusual book. It's almost written as kind of a play, really, or it takes many forms as you're doing it, but this is a book about mourning loss, about mourning the loss of a child, but it's a book which brings all of these characters together to tell their own stories of loss.
Yeah.
Almost like a kind of Greek chorus, or how did you come to this form as the way, or did it just appear to you?
The best ideas, I must break the usual order of, and probably this is what I was looking for something that would be the closest to silence, and yet tell a story. Do you want to read something from
We can do, yes, yeah.
Okay, so maybe you start.
Should I go first, or should you go first?
You go first for 2 minutes. Yeah, okay.
So the idea here is to give a flavor of the language of this book, both in English and in Hebrew. I thought you would go first, but I will go first.
You will go first, yeah.
So the book is written both kind of as a play in verse. Town chronicler, and there are different parts, so you'll hear me speak the parts. Town chronicler. As they sit eating dinner, the man's face suddenly turns. He thrusts his plate away. Knives and forks clang. He stands up and seems not to know where he is. The woman recoils in her chair. His gaze hovers around her without taking hold, and she, wounded already by disaster, senses immediately, it's here again, touching me, its cold fingers on my lips. But what happened? She whispers with her eyes. Bewildered, the man looks at her and speaks. I have to go. Where? To him. Where? To him, there. To the place where it happened? No, there. What do you mean, there? I don't know. You're scaring me. Just to see him once more. But what could you see now? What is left to see? I might be able to see him there. Maybe even talk to him. Talk? You want to do your part now?
Okay. I'll read in Hebrew. This is my language. Maybe I should just explain to those of you who are not totally informed about it. It's a language that counts back something like 3,000 or 4,000 years. It means that if Abraham the patriarch was to sit with us to the dinner table, he could have understood at least 50% of the language of my 21 years old daughter. I also can understand 50% of her language, so we are even. And it's a fascinating language because it was a dormant beauty for 1800 years. Jewish people did not use this language for everyday life, only for prayers and sacred ceremonies and sacred writings. So it means that almost 2,000 years, merchants did not do their merchandise in Hebrew. There have not been soldiers who had a slang in Hebrew. Couples did not make love in Hebrew. Children did not speak in Hebrew. And then, after these 1800 years, a crazy guy from Russia came, a Jewish came from Israel there was not the state of Israel back then, it was many years before, and he decided he will revitalize, he will kiss the sleeping beauty, and he will bring her back to life. His name was Eliezer ben Yehuda, and he started against the pressure of the Orthodox religious Jews who wanted to keep the language only for the sacred moments, he started to secularize the language, to choose words even from the Bible and to adapt them into modern Hebrew. But of course there were some words that are not in the Bible. We didn't have helicopter or giraffe or tomato in the Bible, so he had to invent. By the way, his version of the tomato to Hebrew is a flirtatious lady, agvania, because she blushes. And just one little anecdote that every Israeli knows, when he got married, he made an agreement with his wife-to-be in the marital agreement that if they have a child, they will speak only Hebrew with him. So she bore a child, his name was Itamar, and can you imagine, he was the only Hebrew-speaking child on earth. Just think of this solitude. And now, today, we all speak Hebrew, and we curse in Hebrew, and it's a very vivid part of our life. So I will read just to allow you to have the melody of this language. רושם קורות העיר, בשעה שהם יושבים ואוכלים את ארוחת הערב, נהפכות פתאום פניו של האיש. בתנועה חדה הוא עודף את הצלחת שלפניו, סכינים ומזלגות מצטלצלים, הוא קם ועומד ונדמה שאינו יודע היכן הוא. מבט מרחף סביב לה ואינו נאחז, והיא, פעם אחת כבר פגע באסון, חשה, הנה זה שוב, כבר נוגע בי. אצבעותיו הקרות בשפתיים שלי, אבל מה קרה? היא לוחשת בעיניה, והאיש מביט בה בתימהון. אני צריך ללכת. לאן? אליו. לאן? אליו, לשם. למקום שזה קרה? לא, לשם. מה זה שם? לא יודע. אתה מפחיד אותי, רק עוד רגע לראות אותו. אבל מה תעשה עכשיו? מה נשאר לראות? אולי שם אפשר לראות? אולי אפילו לדבר איתו? לדבר? ועכשיו הם נפקחים שניהם, מתעוררים. הקול שלך, זה חזר גם שלך. לא כך התגעגעתי לקול שלך. חשבתי שכבר אף פעם לא, יותר מאשר לקול שלי, התגעגעתי לקול שלך.
Well, so do you want to keep reading, or should we talk about the Hebrew?
Talk about the
Well, because you told me a wonderful story about your translators. And, I was thinking that we come here and many of the writers who come from around the world to Jaipur, even those who are not from English-speaking countries, write in English and have become very well known as writers in English. And of course many of the Indian fiction and non-fiction writers who have been celebrated abroad write in English and not in Hindi or Kannada or Tamil. Although of course there's lots of writing that gets done in these languages, but it tends to be less celebrated internationally. But you have always written in Hebrew, and I feel quite certain that you could not even contemplate the idea of writing in English.
No. How could I? I mean, in the Hebrew, I want to believe I know many of the nuances of this language. I know how a word in the most updated slang of the street, how it echoes the Bible. I feel the thickness of this language, and I think I know how to hold it. And I know the associations and the connotations and all the small passwords that every language has. I do not have it in any other language. I will not dare to write in English. And yet I want to say I really regard it as a privilege to write in Hebrew, even if my constituency in my original language is very limited, very small. I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of people can read this modern the Hebrew of Amos Oz or A.B. Hoshua or myself. And yet it is a great privilege to write in such an old but very young language and to create all these contacts between the ancient years and modernity, and to be able to play. It's a very playful language, the Hebrew. It's surrender. I will come to the translators, don't I? You see, I just build the suspense, you see, because then I'll come with it. Okay, I'll go. I mean, Jonathan is impatient, so I'll go there.
No, I was going to ask you a question, which is, do you think that Hebrew is a more inventive language than English? Because English, in part, has now become a sort of global language, or a default global language, which, of course, there's inventiveness there, and you read someone like Arvind Adiga, or, writers from non-English-speaking countries have done inventive things with English. But I wonder if English has been stripped of these layers of complexity that you say, are in Hebrew and are there to play with for a writer.
Again, I cannot judge, I will not dare to judge the English. I know that Hebrew is very playful, very, very flexible, very able to adapt words from many other languages and to Hebrewify them. Of Israel is to play with the language, and the slang is extremely rich in Israel. Maybe it has to do, by the way, to the fact that the main manufacture of slang in Israel is the army. And because the army is so present and even dominant, also the language of the army is very, very present. But also it has to do with the fact that many of the Jews who poured into Israel came from 70 diasporas, as we say, 7 foreign countries for us. And most of them are unable to converse with each other with the official Hebrew or the biblical Hebrew, so they create a slang in order to correspond amongst themselves. But I told you about this project that I did in the last 2 books, The Falling Out of Time, and another book that will come up in English in 2016, and is called A Horse Walks into a Bar. And it's, as it sounds, it's a book about a stand-up comedian in Israel. And in both cases, because I felt that the translation will be really challenging for my poor translators, I invited 15 of my translators to a home in a little town in Germany. Why in Germany, which is not a natural choice for me? Why in Germany? Because there is, in a place called Strahlen, on the Dutch border, a center for translators and translation. There is a home, and inside this home there are all the walls, also in the residence of the guests, are huge libraries, and there are 24,000 dictionaries from every language to every language, dictionaries of terminology of shipyards in England in the 18th century, and of perfumes in France of the 19th century, everything you want. Dictionaries of curses. By the way, I discovered something very interesting, that usually every language chooses for its most ugly, nasty curses the language of its hated enemy. Interesting. I mean, it gives away something. So we sat there, me and the translators, and we sat there for 5-6 days, and I read to them a paragraph or a poem from Falling Out of Time, and I paused. And then they started to whisper amongst themselves and to consult, and we made them sit all the sister languages, like the German with the Dutch, and the Swedish with the Norwegian, and the Finnish, and the Slovakian with the Polish, and the Italian with the Spanish and the Catalan. And they started to find solutions to translation, which is not an easy thing, because I'm very much Hebrew in my writing. And then you would see all kind of interesting questions. For example, there is I write about a fetus, and they wanted to know exactly, the Slovakian, I think, in what phase of the pregnancy I refer to, because there are different names to fetus in different phases. In Hebrew there is only one. You are an embryo, an ubar, from the moment you are conceived until you are born. How boring it is. Or there was a moment when suddenly my German wonderful translator said, no, this poem is, this is kitsch, and it's sentimental. And immediately the Catalan and the Italian translator jumped on her and said, why sentimental? It is emotional. It is exactly the right tone of emotionality. So you could have seen there the translation, which is really a magical act, and not totally understandable. How is it possible that I use a sentence that echoes the Bible and someone translates it to Tamil or to Chinese or to Arabic, and it creates totally different waves of memory and connotation and association. How is it possible at all? But yet you could have seen how this act and art of translation is a mixture of both the psychology of the language and the culture, but also of the psychology of the individual, of the translator who sits and translates. And I will just say that my translators were so happy for this gathering, because translators are so lonely usually. They are the only ones who work on a certain book in their country. The others hardly know what this book will be, and they have nobody to consult or to ventilize their anguishes. So now we created a kind of a support group to the translators who are my victims.
I wanted to ask you what it is like for you. You know, you're so intimate with your language and so intimate with your characters, and in a way the books themselves are very much about intimacy and explorations of intimacy. To use this metaphor of the family, for you to sort of to give birth to this child in Hebrew, and then to read it or to hear someone else read it, as I just did in English. I almost wonder if it's like giving birth to a child and then having him raised by someone else and then seeing him come back to you.
Yeah, but this implies also to readers in Hebrew. I write something very personal, very intimate, and I give it to people that I don't know how they are going to like or dislike it, or sometimes it's more insulting to be loved for to be hated, to be loved for the wrong reasons than to be loved for the right reasons. Yes, and I just have to count on my translators. I know they work very hard. It is strange, I must admit. It's like when I listen to you reading in English, it's like seeing myself in a revolving door. I get closer and then remote. You know, it's this strange combination. But you know, we all grew up on translations. We all started to formulate our identity by characters and styles and literatures from far, far away countries. And yet there is something in the story, in literature, I think, which probably is the meeting between the most intimate and the most exotic, in the sense that exotic, it's a little far away and yet we still can decode it. And I think this combination makes literature possible, or a good vehicle for us to understand other people's life and to identify with them and to suddenly be in the world in a more complex way.
So after you finished writing this most recent book, which is not yet out in English, or presumably has it been translated into Tamil yet? No.
I think that next week it comes out in Tamil.
There we are, all right. But after you finished writing A Horse Walks Into a Bar, you told me that you took a break from writing. Maybe for the first time in your life, I imagine. I was remembering that when we first met, you told me that I asked you what it was like when you first began to write, and you said, I always compare it to when you discover sex for the first time. That there are all of these feelings you didn't know existed, but now you're addicted to them. So what was it like for you
to stop writing,
to take a year and to live like normal people, to live like everyone else?
I'll not say it was like quitting sex for a year. But I really felt I need to be in contact with life without the mediation of writing. Writing, no matter how extreme I can be in my writing, but still it allows me to create a world that is mine and it's understandable. And I felt I need to be more exposed. But also, you know, after so many years of writing, I just enjoyed just to be, not having to formulate what I feel or to use things that happen to me in writing. And there was this luxurious feeling of being more and more with my family. We have now 2 granddaughters, and with my old parents, and not to be grumpy of the fact that each time I'm deprived of my writing, because writing has for me an obsessive quality. I really love it. I really love to be in the state of mind of writing, because when I'm not writing, life can be very comfortable, but things just come one next to the other. And when I write, everything is interwoven and has a kind of inner implication and enriches me and all the time tells me new things about myself and matures me. While when I'm not writing, I feel as if I've retired and I live quite good life, but actually it's a little boring for me. And now I feel, because now I started writing and I feel these really great days of the beginning, because I don't know what I am going to write about. I just know that now I am nesting. Yes, that now it starts, something starts, and there is one or two good ideas that I will try to see which one of them will be more dominant and appealing for me, because not always I understand why a certain idea sticks to me. I do not really understand at the first take why should I write this story. I mean, there are other writers. Go there, yeah. Go to Amos Oz. Leave me alone, yeah. And then slowly, gradually, I understand why I had to write this story. Why my life would have been different had I not written this story. That this story really tells the most innermost thing to me. And now I'm in this phase, and really, it's great. I feel as if I have fever, but I'm as double as healthy as possible.
Do you think this is the only way to be a writer? I mean,
No.
you go around the world, you meet other writers. Do you meet people who are, do it part-time? For you, I feel, you've talked before about how you walk when you write. And it almost, this metaphor in my mind is that it's almost like breathing for you, right? That sort of walking, writing, breathing, eating, these things all are of a piece.
Yeah, I agree, but it's not the only way to write. I mean, and also in my writing career, there are also periods that it's really hard, that I feel I knock my head against the wall, as we say, and I do not understand something. And I remember when I was writing Ora, the main protagonist of To the End of the Land, it was so difficult for years, for 2 or 3 years. It was really harsh because I felt she does not surrender to me, so to say. And then I did something. I wrote a letter to her. I just sat and wrote a letter to her, like you write to another human being. And immediately when I started to write it, not only that she became concrete and tangible and full of validity to me, like of a human being, but also it became clear that I have to surrender to her. It's not the other way around. And you see, usually we keep yourself quite entrenched against the surrendering to other people. Usually we develop all kinds of instinct not to be totally exposed to the radiation of other people, sometimes because it threatens us or it's too much for us to take, or we don't want it. And we are protected even from the people who are the closest to us. And I think for me, writing is just going in the other direction, just allowing myself to open up to see what happens to me when I allow myself to be a woman, when I allow myself to be a Palestinian, an old Palestinian who is a storyteller, when I am a child of 4 years old, when I wrote about a dog and I felt I became a dog, when I wrote about the commander of extermination camp during the time of the Holocaust, and I became him. It was important for me to expose myself to the process that a normal person has to undergo in order to become a mass murderer. All these things, all these really temptation, it is a temptation because I think we consist of so many other options, but usually we congeal after a while. And we congeal because it's more functional, because it's more comfortable, because how much can we revitalize or recreate ourselves? But writing allows you every 3, 4, 5 years suddenly to totally becoming another human being and to see the way other human beings are reading life and reading the text of life. And it's a great gift, I must say.
Is this what writers have to contribute to politics? We've avoided talking about politics all this time. I'm very proud of us. But I was going to ask you because, of course, as everyone here in the audience knows, there's been a lot of agitation locally of writers protesting, people returning their government awards. and I don't want to ask you if it's the writer's duty to do these things, because I think everyone has a different answer to that. But do you think that what the writer brings to this public conversation is this sense of openness, of everything you were just describing, that is what makes writing powerful?
Yeah. First of all, you are right. It's not the duty of a writer, period. The duty of a writer is to write a good story. And there are wonderful writers who protect themselves from the political situation also in Israel, and it does not make them a lesser good writers. There are some writers, I think that by nature, the thing that makes them writers make them also more exposed to the situation and more vulnerable even to the situation and more driven inwardly to change this situation. I have no aspiration in politics. I will be a total failure in politics. But I think that I have a sensitivity to the moment when the government, as I said, start to manipulate the language or try to forge a language that would be imposed on people and will buffer between them and their own reality. But I think a writer has the greatest adventure that the writer has, and this is the only advantage. This is the only advantage on people in other occupations like journalists or researchers, historians, taxi driver, carpenters, is the instinct of the writer to see every given situation from several points of view, not to congeal in your own point of view, because this is not being in touch with reality. It's being in touch with you, with your needs, with your fears. It's not reality. And the need, or the need and the instinct to come to the reality of the conflict and to allow myself to see it also from the point of view of my enemies. People who do not like me, and most likely they probably, if you ask them, they wouldn't like us to be there. And yet, because my ultimate goal is not to educate the Palestinians, but to allow life of peace and to allow a kind of future for both Palestinians and Israelis. This is the major thing, not to love each other. It's not a Hollywoodian movie that in the end we and the Palestinian will walk hand in hand to the sunset. No, I'm talking about a realistic and a very practical need to have peace between us and them. And this ability, I think, is what makes a person a writer. This ability to change the point of view, to see how they read the text of the conflict, where they are being misleading themselves by their own hallucination and anxieties, where they are making themselves fail, and where are there just important points that we have to listen to them and to collaborate with it in order to achieve normalcy. Because I'll tell you, I want to have peace because, and I'm struggling for it for more than 3 decades now. It will be good for the Palestinians because it will allow these miserable people, these talented, ambitious people who are subjugated under the pressure of so many foreign regimes, from the Turks and the British and the Egyptians and us. Our occupation is the least cruel than all the four. And I want to see how they will be able to have their life without our shadow. I don't want to cast shadow on their life. I want them to have normal, sovereign life and to raise their children in dignity and to really explore everything that is in their potential. And I want to live, next to each other as neighbors for many years and to see what we can make together, because there are so many similarities between us and them that we do not allow ourselves to recognize. But I also think that having peace will allow us, the Israelis, for the first time in almost 2,000 years, really, and it's not only a phrase, to live life that are rooted in our home. I think one of the deepest definitions of a Jew throughout history was of someone who never really felt at home in the world. Even in the most hospitable, friendly places, we were not at home. Israel is meant to be our home, a home in the sense that one feels both confidence and comfortability and belonging in a non-dubious and non-argumentable way, and that all the neighbors and the whole world agrees on the borders, on the walls of this home, and we can start to have normal relationship with our neighbors and start to have life that will not, that young couples will not quote this terrible phrase, so we want to have 3 kids, so if one of them is killed, and you can end it by yourself. Only having normalcy, dialogue, peace with the Palestinians will allow both Israelis and Palestinians to start, after years, to start to have normal life, which will allow them to explore all their potentials, to live life not only to survive from one catastrophe to another, to live full life.
And there we have to end it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to David Grossman.
Thank you.
I'm sorry we're out of time and won't be able to do a Q&A, but David Grossman will be signing books, so please do go over to the Full Circle bookshop, pick up a copy of his books, and make your way over to the book signing area at the back of the lawn here. Let's thank once again David Grossman and Jonathan Shainin.